She left work late, walking her usual shortcut across the old bridge, just as a storm blacked out the entire town. The patrol car idling nearby belonged to the man everyone trusted, the one who'd given safety talks at her high school. The next morning, all that remained was the memory of a swinging lantern swallowed by rain. For decades, the town believed the river had taken her, until a highway crew cracked open a forgotten slab of asphalt and unearthed something far too intact. Now the man who once rescued flood victims is at the center of a horrifying question. Was the town's Good Samaritan always hiding behind a uniform? The neon sign at Marlowe's diner flickered once, twice, then went dark as thunder rolled across Ridge Hollow. Inside, rain drummed against the windows, while Earl Marlowe counted out the register by the light of his brass-collared railroad lantern, its warm glow casting long shadows across the checkered floor. "Power's liable to be out all night with this system," he said, stacking quarters with practiced efficiency. "You sure you don't want that ride home, Ruthie? Weather's turning mean." Ruthie Hale wrung out her mop one final time, her shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. "I'm fine, Mr. Marlowe. It's just across Hammond Bridge, same as always." She untied her apron and folded it precisely, tucking the night's tips into her cardigan pocket. The wadded bills would help with Tommy's new inhaler. Her little brother's breathing had been worse lately with the autumn chill. Lightning strobed through the windows, illuminating the empty booths where the last customers had nursed their coffee until nearly midnight. In that flash, Marlowe caught the exhaustion in Ruthie's face, the kind that came from too many late shifts and too much worry for someone not yet 17. "At least take my lantern," he insisted, holding out the brass lamp. "Path gets dark by the bridgehead, even without a blackout. You can return it tomorrow." Ruthie accepted the lantern with a soft, "Thank you." Its familiar weight settled in her hand as she pulled her cardigan closer against the dampness. Through the front windows, she could make out the police cruiser idling 2 blocks down, its outline distinct even in the gloom. Officer Bruckner's car. He always worked the night shift on Saturdays. The bell chimed as Ruthie stepped out onto the wet sidewalk. The storm air hit her face, thick with the metallic scent of rain and river mud. Her sensible shoes clicked against the concrete as she started her usual route home, the lantern's glow bobbing ahead of her like a will-o-wisp. From the diner's doorway, Marlowe watched her go. The lantern's light grew smaller, swaying with each step as Ruthie approached the darker stretch near Hammond Bridge. The ancient span creaked in high winds, its wooden planks worn smooth by decades of crossing feet. Most folks avoided it after sunset, but Ruthie had been taking this shortcut home since she started at the diner last spring. The patrol car's headlights remained steady in the distance, a reassuring presence on this storm-black night. Officer Bruckner had given enough safety talks at the high school that his vehicle had become as much a part of Ridge Hollow's nighttime landscape as the bridge itself. Thunder cracked overhead, and the rain intensified, becoming sheets of silver needles in the darkness. Marlowe squinted through the downpour, watching until Ruthie's lantern light disappeared around the bend toward Hammond Bridge. The last thing he saw was that brass-collared glow, swinging steady through the storm like a pendulum marking time. At 1 o'clock, the phone at the police station would ring. Ruthie's mother, voice tight with worry, would ask the dispatcher if anyone had seen her daughter. By morning, that swinging lantern light would become the last known trace of Ruthie Hale, a point of brightness swallowed by the rain and thunder of an October night in Ridge Hollow. Dawn broke grey and sullen over Ridge Hollow. Earl Marlowe unlocked the diner's front door at 5:45 a.m., earlier than any Sunday in the restaurant's 30-year history. His hands shook slightly as he spread a county road map across the counter where Ruthie had rolled silverware just hours before. Inside, coffee percolated, while a dozen men huddled around the map, their wet boots leaving puddles on the linoleum. Red pushpins marked search zones along the Gasconade River's meandering course. Blue ones traced the foot search patterns, spreading out from Hammond Bridge like veins on a leaf. "River's up 8 feet from the storm," said Fire Chief Peterson, his radio crackling with updates from the boat crews. "Currents pushing southeast hard through the willows." He placed another pin where the drag teams would start their next pass. Outside, the morning air hung heavy with mist. Boy Scout Troop 242 formed a line at the east bank, their khaki uniforms dark with dew as they linked arms through the riverside brush. Churchmen from First Baptist worked the opposite shore, calling Ruthie's name into the fog. Their voices echoed off the limestone bluffs, unanswered. The river offered up its usual debris: waterlogged branches, tangles of fishing line, crushed beer cans that glinted dully in the morning light. But no brass lantern, no blue cardigan, no sensible shoes that had clicked so precisely across the diner floor. At the sheriff's station, Officer Dean Bruckner sat typing his report with methodical precision. His account emphasized the dangerous conditions. Victim likely disoriented during county-wide power outage. Hammond Bridge lacks guardrails. River hazard significant due to storm surge. The report noted his location at 12:10 a.m., across town handling a minor collision at Oaken, Maine. A dispatch log, misfiled in the overnight shuffle, corroborated his timeline. The rain tapered to a drizzle by late afternoon. Near the bridgehead, Deputy Waters discovered 2 partial shoe prints in the mud, their edges already softening. A few yards away, a scuff mark led toward the abandoned toll house, a square stone building that had served no purpose since the county stopped collecting bridge fees in '68. "Got to check it," Waters said, slogging through the wet grass. But the heavy padlock on the toll house door hung undisturbed, its steel casing green with age. No signs of tampering, no broken windows, just another empty building slowly crumbling into the Missouri landscape. As darkness fell, portable floodlights hummed to life on Hammond Bridge, their harsh beams cut through the remnants of mist, reflecting off the rain-swollen river below. The search teams gathered their gear, muscles aching, from hours of combing the shoreline and dragging the deeper pools. "We'll start again at first light," Sheriff Mills announced to the tired volunteers. "Focus on the downstream bends. River might have carried her a fair piece in that current." The floodlights cast long shadows across the bridge planks, their glare unable to penetrate the deeper darkness gathering at the edges of Ridge Hollow. In the toll house's shadow, that heavy padlock held its secrets, its metallic surface reflecting back fragments of artificial light, like a mirror catching pieces of the truth, but never the whole. The Monday sky hung like a sheet of wet newspaper over Ridge Hollow. At the sheriff's station, Linda Hale sat rigid in a metal chair, her fingers working the hem of her sweater as she recited the contents of her daughter's missing purse to Deputy Waters. The choir pin was gold-plated about this big. She formed a circle with her thumb and forefinger. "First Baptist Church Choir with 73 engraved on the back. Ruthie never took it off her purse strap." Her voice caught. "The order pad from Marlowe's. A receipt from Wilson's Pharmacy dated Thursday, 42:30 for Tommy's inhaler refill. 4 bus tokens in the side pocket." Waters wrote each item in his notepad, the pages crackling in the quiet room. Down the hall, the coffee maker sputtered, and phones rang with tips that led nowhere. At Marlowe's diner, Earl Marlowe pulled out a thick folder from beneath the register, rifling through papers until he found what he needed. "Insurance inventory from '72, he told the detective. "That brass lantern. It had this serial mark stamped under the base." He pointed to a line item. "Got a nick in the collar too, right here." He sketched the location on a napkin. "Night cook dropped it 2 years back. Never sat quite straight after that." Outside, deputies worked their way methodically through downtown Ridge Hollow. They peered into dumpsters behind May's Hardware, checked the loading dock at Peterson's Feed, and combed through the tall grass along the bridge approaches. Their radios crackled with updates. Nothing in the Methodist Church parking lot, nothing behind the Texaco, nothing in the drainage ditches. Officer Dean Bruckner spent the morning with the Hales, his patrol car parked conspicuously in their driveway. He sat at their kitchen table, badge gleaming, voice gentle with practiced concern. "Walking alone after midnight," he said, shaking his head. "I told her so many times. The bridge isn't safe in the dark." He patted Linda's hand. "We'll find her, Mrs. Hale. But these teenage girls, they don't think about danger. Don't think about what could happen." The breakthrough came at 4:17 p.m., when Billy Pearson and Jake Wheeler found the purse. The 2 high school sophomores were throwing rocks at floating branches near the Willow Bend, half a mile downstream from Hammond Bridge, when they spotted the strap caught in the twisted roots. Deputy Waters arrived within minutes. He photographed the purse's position, then carefully extracted it from the tangle of vegetation. Water had soaked through the canvas, but inside they found exactly what Linda Hale had described: the damp order pad, its pages blank and stuck together. 4 bus tokens in the side pocket, dulled by river water. The pharmacy receipt, now illegible. But there was no cash from her tips, no choir pin on the strap, no fragments of lantern glass. Sheriff Mills stood on the riverbank as the sun settled behind the bluffs, watching his men string crime scene tape between the willows, the purse's location, the missing items, the river's surge during the storm. It all pointed to what Ridge Hollow feared least and believed most: a tragic accident, a missed step in the dark, a young life swept away by the current. "Focus everything on the river corridor," he told his deputies. "Get the boats back out at first light. Check every snag and eddy between here and the county line." By Tuesday morning, the sheriff's department's makeshift press room, normally the courthouse basement's records storage, filled with reporters from Springfield and Columbia. Camera lights cast harsh shadows across Sheriff McKee's face as he gripped the wooden podium, his khaki uniform crisp despite 2 sleepless nights. "We're asking anyone who was near Hammond Bridge between 12:15 and 12:45 a.m. Saturday night to come forward," McKee said, his voice steady. "No detail is too small. Even if you think someone else must have reported it already, we want to hear from you." Behind him, a map of Ridge Hollow showed the search zones in red marker. Yellow pushpins traced Ruthie's last known path from Marlowe's diner toward the bridge. Blue ones marked where Billy Pearson and Jake Wheeler had found her purse. "I want to address some rumors circulating in our community," McKee continued. "We have no evidence of foul play at this time. Speculation only hurts the family and diverts resources from our search efforts." Officer Dean Bruckner stood at the back of the room, arms crossed over his chest. During the question period, he raised his hand, badge catching the camera lights. "Sheriff, if I may, we're burning daylight on side investigations." Bruckner's tone carried the weight of his 17 years on the force. "That old toll house, for instance, it's county property, scheduled for demolition next month. The key's been missing since '69, according to maintenance records. We should focus our resources downstream, widen the drag pattern past Miller's Bend." McKee nodded, but Deputy Waters, sitting near the front, frowned at his notepad. The night shift logs spread across his lap told a messier story. The power outage had thrown the department's usual documentation into chaos. Timestamps were missing or illegible. Radio communications had gone unrecorded. The careful choreography of patrol cars through Ridge Hollow's streets had dissolved into a fog of uncertainty. Waters flipped through the pages again. Bruckner's fender-bender call at 12:10 a.m. was noted, but the responding officer's signature was smudged. The location was listed simply as Main St, which stretched for 2 miles through town. The deputy's pen hesitated over the gaps. Something about the convenient chaos nagged at him. By sunset, exhaustion had settled over Ridge Hollow like a heavy blanket. Volunteer searchers trudged back to their trucks, boots caked with river mud. The water had yielded nothing but broken branches and false hopes. Across town in the Hale kitchen, 13-year-old Tommy Hale slumped over scattered sheet music, his sister's choir lyrics marked with her neat pencil annotations. His mother's fingers brushed his hair but couldn't bear to wake him. The inhaler he'd been clutching rolled softly across the Formica tabletop. Ridge Hollow settled into another uneasy night. Porch lights stayed on all along Oak Street, defying the darkness. Moths circled the sodium lamps on Hammond Bridge, where a lone patrol car idled, watching the black water slide past below. The town clung to hope, praying tomorrow's sun would illuminate what tonight's shadows kept hidden. Wednesday morning arrived, with an unseasonable warmth that burned off the river mist early. The crowd at Marlowe's diner had thinned to just 4 tables, mostly deputies drinking coffee between shifts, their radio squawk a quiet reminder of duties elsewhere. The wall of volunteer sign-up sheets had shrunk to a single page. At Ridge Hollow High School, Principal Barnes unlocked the front doors at 7:30 a.m. sharp, determined to restore routine. Students filtered in slowly, their conversations hushed. Ruthie's empty desk in Mr. Peterson's third-period English class remained untouched, her copy of The Great Gatsby still bookmarked halfway through. Down at the river, the water level had dropped enough to expose stretches of muddy shoreline. Sheriff McKee stood with his hands on his hips, watching 2 boats make methodical passes near the bridge supports. The sandbars emerging from the receding water revealed nothing but twisted branches and river trash. Old tires, plastic bags, a rusted bike frame. "We'll maintain targeted efforts," McKee told reporters at noon, choosing his words carefully. The phrase landed like a gentle letdown, understood by all as the beginning of the end. Search teams would shrink from dozens to handfuls, then to occasional patrols. The machinery of small-town life needed to grind forward again. But Sarah Hale refused to accept the river's silence. She stayed at the bridge all afternoon, a thermos of coffee going cold beside her as she watched the water. Earl Marlowe joined her around 3, after the lunch rush died down. "That lantern was special," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Brass collar with that little nick in it, like a signature. Someone would have found pieces if—" She couldn't finish the thought. Marlowe nodded, understanding what she couldn't say. If Ruthie had fallen, if the current had taken her, something should have surfaced. The lantern, at least, with its distinctive metal collar. Its absence felt like a splinter in their certainty about what happened that night. The autumn sun set early, painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple. The last search boat made its final pass, the crew storing their grappling hooks with deliberate care, as if apologizing for giving up. One by one, the powerful floodlights that had turned night into day since Saturday clicked off. Darkness crept back over Hammond Bridge for the first time since Ruthie disappeared. At the Hale house, dinner sat mostly untouched. Meatloaf and mashed potatoes going cold on 3 plates. Tommy pushed his food around without eating, his inhaler within arm's reach as always. The kitchen clock ticked loud in the silence, marking time in a world that had somehow continued spinning despite their private apocalypse. Beyond the edge of town, the abandoned toll house stood dark against the clearing sky. Its weathered boards and boarded windows revealed nothing of what lay behind them, the padlock on its door giving no hint of secrets kept or released. Stars emerged one by one overhead, indifferent to the weight of absence settling over Ridge Hollow. A town slowly, reluctantly accepting that some questions might never find answers. The river rolled on beneath Hammond Bridge, carrying its knowledge downstream into the gathering night. The weeks after Ruthie's disappearance blurred together like watercolors in rain. Halloween came and went, jack-o'-lanterns darkening on porches, while parents kept their children closer than usual. By mid-November, frost edged the riverbanks each morning, and the sheriff's daily patrols became weekly drive-bys. At Marlowe's diner, the wall of search maps came down, but Ruthie's senior photo stayed up beside the register, her smile bright beneath the choir robe, the gold pin catching studio light. Earl Marlowe developed a habit of pouring free coffee for anyone who mentioned her name or showed up with muddy boots from checking the shoreline. Some days that meant a dozen cups on the house. By spring, maybe 1 or 2. Just in case, he'd say, topping off their mugs. Someone might remember something. Christmas lights appeared downtown like every year, strings of colored bulbs reflecting in shop windows. The Hales left their porch dark, but Sarah hung Ruthie's stocking anyway, its toe still stretched from the oranges her daughter always insisted belonged there. Tommy, 12 now, watched his mother touch the empty fabric each morning, her fingers lingering on the sewn letters of his sister's name. The county maintenance department modernized in early 1975, switching to standardized locks and keys across all facilities. The old hardware, brass deadbolts, skeleton keys, and heavy padlocks, ended up in bankers' boxes labeled surplus municipal property. Workers stacked them in the back of a maintenance shed, where they gathered dust next to outdated traffic signs and spare fence posts. No one logged the contents. No one needed to. The new system was cleaner, safer, better tracked. Tommy entered his teens with careful steps, measuring each day in steady breaths. During asthma attacks, he'd press fingers to his throat and count heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, until the tightness passed. "Ruthie taught me," he'd tell concerned teachers, though she hadn't. The habit had formed those October nights when panic felt like drowning and counting seemed the only way to surface. 1978 brought budget meetings and maintenance reviews. The toll house, empty since 71, made every demolition list, but never quite reached the top. Other projects took priority: the courthouse roof, the jail's heating system, the elementary school playground. The old structure stayed standing, its padlock oxidizing in the weather, its door unopened since the search. Kids sometimes dared each other to touch the knob at night, but none did. The 10th anniversary arrived quietly. The Ridge Hollow Gazette ran a small piece on page 3. Decade later, questions remain in Hale case. Below the headline, A grainy reprint of Ruthie's choir photo sat beside standard quotes from law enforcement about ongoing investigations and the need for public vigilance. Officer Dean Bruckner, his reputation burnished by years of community service and solved cases, organized a small ceremony at Hammond Bridge. He laid a wreath of white carnations against the railings, the flowers bright against weathered metal. "We never forget," he told the gathered crowd, his voice carrying over the river's constant murmur. "Not in this town." Behind him, the water rolled past, deep and opaque. Somewhere in a county maintenance shed, old keys lay tangled in their boxes. Their patterns matched to locks long since replaced, their absence from any inventory as complete as Ruthie's own. Sarah Hale watched from her kitchen window as people dispersed from the bridge ceremony. In the living room, Tommy's breathing exercises marked time. 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3 heartbeats, 4. Spring 1991 arrived in Ridge Hollow with a vengeance. March rains pounded the Ozarks for 6 straight days, turning creeks into torrents and saturating the hills until they wept water from every crack. The Gasconade River, usually a gentle presence in town life, swelled beyond its banks, its muddy waters climbing yard by yard toward Hammond Bridge. Main Street became a hive of activity as volunteers stacked sandbags in wobbling lines. Pickup trucks hauled load after load of sand from the quarry, their tailgates caked with grit. The emergency siren's wail cut through the drumming rain at noon, its pattern signaling flood warning rather than tornado. Police cruisers crawled through neighborhoods with bullhorns, warning residents that the river would crest near the bridge by nightfall. Into this chaos strode Dean Bruckner, his return as perfectly timed as a movie hero's entrance. Though retired from the force for 3 years, he carried the same commanding presence that had marked his police career. Age had only enhanced his authority, silver hair replacing sandy brown, laugh lines deepening, around eyes that still held their steady blue focus. Channel 12's news van splashed through puddles behind him, a young reporter in a rain slicker narrating his every move. Former Officer Dean Bruckner, known locally as an emergency response expert, has returned to coordinate flood defense efforts, she announced, holding her microphone close against the wind. Bruckner moved with practiced efficiency, directing sandbag lines and checking weak points along the flood barrier. At the county utility gate blocking access to the Riverside Maintenance Road, he pulled out a ring of tarnished keys that caught the camera's attention. "Just for show," he chuckled when asked, though the ancient brass key slid into the lock with practiced ease. "From my early days on patrol, sentimental value." As dusk approached and the river rose, headlights cut through the rain near the old toll house. Foundation. A sedan sat stranded in the rising water, its driver honking in panic. Bruckner didn't hesitate. Wading into the knee-deep current, he reached the car door and helped the elderly driver to safety. Volunteers cheered from the sandbag line as both figures emerged from the gloom. The TV crew caught it all. The rescue, the grateful driver, Bruckner's modest wave to the cameras. Later, they filmed him beside his mud-splattered truck, where a brass lantern hung mounted in the bed, its collar bearing a distinctive nick that caught the light. "Old emergency gear," he explained, patting the lantern. "From back when we had more blackouts than streetlights. Still works too." By morning, the flood threat had passed. The Gasconade crested just below the bridge deck and began its slow retreat, leaving behind a film of river mud and a fresh chapter in local lore. The Sunday edition of the Ridge Hollow Gazette ran a full-page spread. Local hero guards the bridge again. The photo showed Bruckner in 3/4 profile, the antique key ring hanging from his belt, that brass-collared lantern glowing behind him like a beacon. "Some folks just know how to step up when trouble comes," the article concluded. Dean Bruckner has proven once again why Ridge Hollow calls him its Good Samaritan. The mud-thick waters of the Gasconade had retreated, leaving Main Street glazed with river silt that baked under a tentative April sun. Volunteers worked in teams, dragging fire hoses across sidewalks, the spray revealing clean concrete in widening arcs. The air smelled of wet earth and diesel from the public works trucks, hauling away sodden sandbags. Dean Bruckner moved through it all like a conductor through his orchestra, carrying a cardboard tray of coffee cups from Marlowe's diner. He passed them out with practiced efficiency, calling volunteers by name, asking after families, accepting backslaps and grateful nods with the same modest smile he'd worn on camera. Inside the diner, old Jim Marlowe worked his regular window cleaning routine, shoulders stooped more than they had been in '74, movements careful against arthritis. The morning sun caught the glass at an angle, making rainbow shapes in the soap streaks. He dipped his cloth, wrung it and reached up to wipe, then stopped. The Sunday paper lay open on the counter behind him, turned to the feature spread. Something about the photograph had snagged his attention like a loose thread, pulling at an old seam. He lowered his arms slowly, water dripping from the cloth onto his shoes as he stared at the image. The lantern in Bruckner's truck bed, that brass collar with its distinctive nick, not just similar to the one he documented after Ruthie disappeared, but identical. The same sharp notch where he'd dropped it that night in '72, the same angle catching the light. Marlowe's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the paper. Outside, Bruckner's voice carried through the glass, telling someone about proper sandbag stacking technique. The diner owner's eyes stayed fixed on that brass collar, memory overlaying the photo like a transparency. Ruthie, holding it as she closed up, the way its beam had swung into that rainy darkness. He folded the paper carefully, creasing it along the photo's edge. The doubt crept in as he slipped it into his jacket. 17 years was a long time to trust memory. Brass lanterns weren't exactly rare. Notches could look similar in newsprint. The coffee pot burbled behind him, marking time, reminding him of orders to fill. That evening, after the last customer had gone, Marlowe sat at his kitchen table with the insurance form he'd never thrown away. The serial number was there in faded ink, along with his notation about the nick. Brass collar damaged 872, 1 4-inch notch at base. He held the newspaper clipping beside it, comparing, measuring with his thumb. The alignment was perfect. An old recipe box sat on his counter. Supplies, written in his wife's hand, before cancer took her in '82. Bills, receipts, equipment warranties, the ordinary paperwork of running a diner. Marlowe lifted the lid, hesitated, then slipped the folded news article between faded index cards. Monday, he whispered to himself, closing the box. I'll talk to someone Monday. Outside his window, Ridge Hollow settled into its evening routine. Porch lights winked on, cars turned into driveways, screen doors clapped shut. The town breathed easier, disaster averted, its gratitude focused on a silver-haired hero who'd come back just when needed. Life resumed its familiar rhythm, like the tick of Marlowe's kitchen clock, counting out another ordinary night. The decades settled over Ridge Hollow like river silt, each year adding another thin layer to the past. The toll house came down in 1998, excavators pulling apart its limestone foundation while commuters crossed Hammond Bridge without a second glance. Fresh asphalt sealed the site, turning it into an unremarkable maintenance yard where county trucks parked in neat rows. 2 hours east in Jefferson City, Dr. Thomas Hale kept his sister's choir pin in the top drawer of his desk at the respiratory clinic. Bronze, shaped like a treble clef, never recovered from that October night. Sometimes between patients, he'd open the drawer just to confirm it was still there, the one piece of Ruthie he had left. His fingers would trace the outline while counting heartbeats, an old habit that had shaped his approach to helping kids manage their asthma attacks. Spring 2018 brought Elise Rourke to Marlowe's diner, her messenger bag heavy with notebooks and recording equipment. The podcaster had been methodically documenting Missouri's unsolved disappearances, cross-referencing newspaper archives and interviewing witnesses before memories faded completely. She ordered coffee and settled into a booth, her large headphones around her neck like a collar. "I've tracked 16 cases within 50 miles, she explained, spreading out a map marked with careful red dots. "Each one tells us something about the others, Mr. Marlowe. Patterns emerge when you look at them together." Jim Marlowe's hands shook slightly as he poured her coffee. He'd aged into his 80s, but his eyes remained sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. The diner had changed little. Same checkerboard floor, same counter stools, same spot above the register where Ruthie's photo had hung until the frame fell apart. "Most folks who come asking, they're looking for sensation," he said, studying Elise's careful notes. "But you've done your homework." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a manila envelope, easing into the booth across from her. Inside was the yellowed newspaper, clipping from 1991, carefully preserved despite its age. The photo showed Dean Bruckner beside his truck, the mounted lantern clearly visible. Insurance papers too, Marlowe said quietly, sliding over a second document. Serial number, description of damage. Never threw them out. Elise leaned forward, her recorder capturing the rustle of old paper. The brass collar's distinctive nick was visible in the photograph, matching Marlowe's neat notation. From 1974, she photographed both items carefully, using her phone's macro lens to capture every detail. The TV station might still have footage from the flood coverage, she mused, making notes. And the ColdCase unit in Jefferson City. They've been digitizing old files. Dusk gathered outside the diner windows as Elise packed up her equipment. She had a list of contacts now. Retired deputies, archive clerks, the station manager who'd filmed Bruckner's flood rescue. The pieces weren't connected yet, but they existed, scattered across filing cabinets and storage rooms throughout central Missouri. "Thank you," she told Marlowe, shouldering her bag, "for keeping these. For remembering." He nodded, watching her leave. The diner's lights reflected off her car windows as she pulled away, heading east toward Jefferson City. Inside, Marlowe returned the envelope to its hiding place, then went back to his evening routine, wiping counters, checking coffee urns, counting out the register. The familiar rhythm of 44 years without answers. The January wind whipped across the State Archives parking lot as Elise Rourke hunched over her laptop, the blue glow of her screen reflecting off her coffee thermos. For the 6th time that morning, she replayed the digitized news footage from 1991, focusing on the 5-second pan across Dean, Bruckner's rescue truck. Frame by frame, she advanced through the sequence until the lantern filled her screen. The brass collar gleamed despite the mud-spattered glass, its distinctive nick catching the camera flash. Elise's fingers trembled as she overlaid Marlowe's insurance document scan, aligning the serial number's description with the freeze frame. The micro-etchings matched perfectly. Tiny manufacturer's marks that formed a unique pattern like a fingerprint in metal. Not just similar, but identical. The same lantern that had swung in Ruthie's hand that October night had somehow ended up mounted as a trophy on Bruckner's truck. Within an hour, Detective Sarah Chen of the Missouri State Highway Patrol's ColdCase unit was reviewing Elise's evidence package. By sunset, a judge had signed the warrant. Work crews arrived at the maintenance yard before dawn, their jackhammers cutting precise lines through decades of asphalt over the old toll house foundation. The concrete gave way with a hollow sound that made the veterans pause. Beneath the broken surface, wooden doors lay sealed with tar paper, preserving what looked like an old storm cellar, the kind of subterranean room common in tornado country, but absent from any building plans filed with the county. "Air's dead down there," observed the first CSI Tech to descend, his flashlight beam cutting through dust motes. "No circulation since the 70s, I'd guess." They worked methodically, photographing each layer as they dug. Modern gravel, older fill, flood-carried silt that dated the space's last exposure to 1974. In the beam of forensic lights, the cellar's contents emerged like photographs developing in solution. An order pad from Marlowe's, its pages warped but legible, showed the last ticket of the night. 2 eggs over easy, rye toast, coffee black. October 26, 1974. Unpaid. A bronze treble clef pin, tarnished nearly black, lay beneath a fallen shelf. The back still bore its choir member number, 147. Ruthie's mother had remembered it exactly, and deeper, caught in rotted wood. Blue wool fibers, color preserved in the airless dark, matched the cardigan Ruthie had worn that night, the one her mother had bought her for her 16th birthday, 3 months before she disappeared. At 10 a.m., Missouri Highway Patrol Captain Marcus Wells stood before a cluster of reporters in the yard. His voice was measured, careful. "This morning, investigators recovered several items of evidence related to the 1974 disappearance of Ruth Hale," he announced. "The ColdCase unit is treating this as an active investigation. We ask for patience as we process the scene properly." The sun climbed higher as technicians continued their careful excavation. Before noon, the call went out to Jefferson City, where Dr. Thomas Hale was between patients. The detective's voice was gentle but firm. "We've found some things that belong to your sister," she said. "We're going to take this slow, do it right. But we need you to know we're not guessing anymore. We have proof she was here." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Dean Bruckner's workshop as Detectives Chen and Morris pulled into the gravel driveway. The tidy building sat behind his ranch house, its metal siding gleaming like a new penny. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Emergency Preparedness and Historical Items." Bruckner met them at the entrance, all smiles and firm handshakes. At 74, he remained broad-shouldered and precise in his movements, wearing pressed khakis and a volunteer fire department polo shirt. "Quite a collection you've got here," Detective Chen observed, scanning walls lined with rescue equipment and flood memorabilia. Coiled ropes, vintage life preservers, and newspaper clippings created a shrine to decades of local emergencies. "Just preserving history," Bruckner replied, leading them past glass cases filled with badges and patches. "Every piece tells a story of someone helped, someone saved." The lantern sat centered on a polished oak shelf, its brass collar catching the workshop's fluorescent light. Chen's pulse quickened. The nick in the metal was exactly where Marlowe had described it, unchanged after 49 years. "That's an interesting piece," Morris commented, nodding toward the lantern. "Mind if we take a closer look?" "Found it at a yard sale years after the '91 flood," Bruckner said, reaching for it himself. "Cleaned her up nice. They don't make them like this anymore. Now, solid brass collar, tempered glass." Chen watched his hands as he handled the lantern, noting how familiar his movements seemed, how he knew exactly where to grip without smudging the metal. "Speaking of floods," Morris said casually, "heard they found some interesting things at the old toll house site this morning." Bruckner's smile never wavered. "Shame about that cellar. Would have flooded in minutes during a real storm. Poor drainage in that section." Chen kept her expression neutral, but her mind raced. The cellar's flood vulnerability hadn't been mentioned in any press release or public statement. Only the investigation team knew those details from their morning assessment. "Mind if we borrow this for our historical archives project?" Chen asked, gesturing to the lantern. Their warrant was ready in her pocket. "Keep it as long as you need," Bruckner replied. "Always happy to help law enforcement." Back at the crime lab, technicians worked late into the evening. Under microscopes, the lantern's brass collar revealed its secrets. Micro scratches from a fall matched the pattern Marlowe had documented in 1972. Trace residues of old oil matched the type the diner had used for refills. In another room, Chen and Morris spread out patrol logs from October 1974. The power outage had scattered paperwork between dispatch and records, creating a convenient gap in accountability. They traced unit locations on a map, watching how the miscategorized reports had hidden a crucial window of time, exactly when Ruthie would have crossed Hammond Bridge. "Look at this," Morris said, pointing to a notation. Car 17 reported mechanical issues at 11:55 p.m., logged back in service at 12:40 a.m. Bruckner's unit. 45 minutes, Chen murmured. More than enough time. By midnight, they had assembled their timeline. Tomorrow they would begin re-interviewing everyone who'd been awake during the blackout. The diner's last customers, the power company crews, anyone who might remember a patrol car's movements in the dark. The lantern sat in an evidence locker, its collar now dusted for prints, its brass holding decades of unspoken history. Like the cellar that had kept its secrets for 49 years, it waited to tell its full story. Morning light filtered through the blinds at Marlowe's diner, catching dust motes in the empty dining room. The neon open sign remained dark as Detective Chen set up a voice recorder on the counter, while Morris arranged photographs and documents in precise chronological order. Marlowe's hands shook slightly as he poured coffee into 3 mugs. At 78, his movements had slowed, but his memory remained sharp as winter. "Frost?" He settled onto a vinyl stool, fingers tracing the edge of the yellowed insurance paperwork he'd preserved for nearly 5 decades. "Start from the beginning," Chen prompted gently. "Tell us about documenting the lantern." "Got it in 71, Marlowe said, tapping the paper. "Insurance wanted everything inventoried. That nick in the collar happened when Sally, my night waitress then, knocked it off the counter in 72. Had to file a damage report but decided to keep using it since the glass didn't break. Wrote down every mark and measure, even sketched that little dent." Morris nodded, photographing each document. "And you recognized it in the newspaper photo? The one with Bruckner? Clear as day." Marlowe pulled out the brittle 1991 clipping from his recipe box. Same brass collar, same nick right where it should be. Kept thinking I was seeing things, but he gestured at the matching details preserved in his meticulous insurance records. Across town, Detective Rivera sat with Ruthie's mother in her small living room. At 82, Margaret Hale's voice remained steady as she recited the contents of her daughter's purse from that night. Details she'd repeated to deputies until they were etched in stone. Order pad, 3 bus tokens, her inhaler receipt, she listed, and that little choir pin she always wore, gold-plated with blue enamel. Youth choir gave them out that Easter. Rivera compared the list to the cellar inventory. Every item matched, down to the denomination of coins in the order pad's pocket. The downstream purse discovery that had anchored the river theory suddenly felt hollow. Staged, even. At the county archives, housed in a basement room that smelled of old paper and metal files, Detective Chen watched the archivist pull a dusty ledger from a back shelf. The book creaked open to reveal neat columns of dates and signatures, tracking the turnover of county property during the 1975 modernization. Here, the archivist said, pointing to a line dated March 12, 1975. Dean Bruckner, temporary access to decommissioned keys for historical preservation, never marked as returned. Chen photographed the page, noting how the sign-out entry lacked the usual counter-signature marking, equipment return. The keys should have gone back to county storage within 48 hours. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Morris and Rivera took Bruckner's ring of show keys to an old storage building where an original county lock still secured a maintenance gate. The largest key slid in smooth as silk, turning without resistance. Perfect fit, Morris noted, bagging the evidence. They drove to the toll house site, comparing Bruckner's detailed flood rescue accounts against the cellar's actual layout. His knowledge of the space exceeded what anyone could have guessed from outside. He knew the ceiling height, the corner where water would pool first, the exact drop from threshold to floor. By 6 o'clock, the detective team gathered in their incident room, evidence arranged in precise chronological order. Insurance documents, newspaper clippings, archive records, site photos, and chain of custody forms documenting each discovery. The warrant request took shape, every element linking together like steel chain. The fluorescent lights of Ridge Hollow's Civic Hall cast a harsh glow over the assembled crowd. Dean Bruckner, dressed in his signature navy windbreaker with emergency response emblazoned across the back, stood at the podium, gesturing toward a PowerPoint slide about flood preparedness. At 74, his voice still carried the authoritative tone that had commanded respect for decades. "Remember, folks, when water rises, minutes matter," he explained, clicking to an image of Hammond Bridge during the 91 flood. "You've got to know your evacuation routes, your high ground markers." The double doors at the back of the hall whispered open. Detective Chen and Morris moved down the center aisle with measured steps, badges visible at their belts. A few heads turned, but most remained fixed on Bruckner's presentation. "And always keep emergency supplies in waterproof containers above." Bruckner's voice faltered as he spotted the detectives. For a fraction of a second, something flickered behind his eyes. A quick calculation, almost amused, before his expression shifted to grandfatherly confusion. "Mr. Bruckner," Chen said quietly, reaching the stage, "we need you to step outside with us." The microphone caught his response. "What's this about?" Morris produced handcuffs, the metal catching the overhead lights. "Sir, please come with us." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as Bruckner's wrists were secured behind his back. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, their cameras capturing the moment the town's hero became something else entirely. Someone gasped. A teenager whispered, "No way." "Folks, there's been a misunderstanding," Bruckner announced, his voice still steady despite the cuffs. "These officers are just doing their job, but we'll get this sorted out." The detectives led him toward the exit. Halfway down the aisle, his composure cracked just slightly, a muscle twitching in his jaw, his shoulders tensing under the windbreaker that suddenly looked less like authority and more like costume. At the station, Bruckner sat in interview room B, his attorney present as Chen laid out the evidence, the lantern with its matched serial marks, the key ring that still opened county locks, the cellar findings. "Ruthie fell," Bruckner stated flatly. "I heard it happening, tried to help, but..." He shook his head, playing regret. The town was already scared of the bridge. I didn't want to make it worse. So you staged the purse downstream? Morris asked. Panic makes you do things, Bruckner replied, his attorney noting something. I just wanted to spare everyone more fear. In the forensics lab across town, analysts compared microscope slides, dust from the lantern's brass collar against silt layers from the toll house cellar. Distinct yellow pollen grains from the old sycamores that lined Hammond Bridge appeared in both samples, a botanical fingerprint linking the scenes. By sunset, Bruckner's booking photo replaced his hero shots on local news feeds. Outside the station, neighbors gathered in small clusters, their conversations a mix of shock and slow-dawning recognition. Some defended his decades of service, others recalled small moments, a too-long stare, an odd comment, that suddenly carried new weight. He helped sandbag my basement in '91, one woman insisted. He knew where my daughter walked home, another replied quietly. The day's last light caught the brass numbers on Bruckner's empty house as detectives finished their search, while across town, his booking paperwork joined the evidence boxes that had finally broken his carefully crafted facade. In the fluorescent-lit conference room of the Phelps County Prosecutor's Office, Assistant District Attorney Sarah Keller spread crime scene photos across a worn oak table. The images showed the lantern's brass collar under magnification, its scratches and serial marks highlighted in forensic detail. Beside them lay the original insurance claim from Marlowe's diner, the paper yellowed, but the numbers still clear. DNA degradation is our weakness, Keller explained to the assembled team. 49 years of moisture and temperature fluctuation left us traces, but nothing that would stand alone in court. Chief Prosecutor Michael Denton nodded, studying the chain of circumstantial links laid out. Before them, photographs of Bruckner's antique keys fitting county locks, the misfiled patrol logs from the night of the blackout, and transcripts of his damning comment about the cellar's flooding pattern. But we've got him boxed in, Denton said. The lantern's micro-etchings match Marlowe's maintenance records. He had key access when no one else did, and he knew details about that cellar that weren't public. In a small office down the hall, Ruthie's family sat together, her mother Margaret, now in her 70s, and her brother Thomas, the respiratory therapist who'd learned to count heartbeats during asthma attacks all those years ago. Detective Chen outlined the plea offer. Second-degree murder and tampering with evidence carrying 15 to 25 years. He's 74, Chen explained gently. This essentially means life. Thomas pulled a weathered notebook from his messenger bag, its spine cracked, pages dog-eared from decades of rereading. He found the entry he'd marked, dated October 24, 1974, 2 days before Ruthie disappeared. Officer Dean said I should wait home. He'd walk Ruthie, Thomas read aloud, his voice steady but thin. He was watching her, planning. He made himself familiar. Margaret touched the notebook's page, her fingers trembling. A trial might give us answers, she said, but it might not. And if we lose, the evidence is strong, Chen assured them, but circumstantial cases are unpredictable. One skeptical juror, one technical ruling. Thomas closed the notebook carefully. We've spent 49 years not knowing. Maybe certainty matters more than confession now. As evening settled over Ridge Hollow, casting long shadows through the office windows, Margaret nodded slowly. Let him plead. Let him claim accident if he needs to. Just let it end. The paperwork moved quickly after that. Bruckner's attorney presented his client's statement, a story about startling Ruthie on the bridge, trying to help, then panicking and hiding evidence. The words rang hollow against the deliberate pattern of his actions, but they would stand as the official record. I accept responsibility for her death, Bruckner wrote in careful cursive at the bottom of his plea. Agreement. His signature followed, neat and controlled to the last. Judge Harrison set sentencing for the following Wednesday at 9 a.m. As court officers led Bruckner back to his cell, Thomas and Margaret walked out into the evening air. They carried no triumph, no satisfaction, only the weight of a truth finally anchored in fact, and the promise that their next sunrise would dawn without wondering. Morning fog clung to the Phelps County courthouse steps as people gathered for Dean Bruckner's sentencing. The crowd stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the limestone columns, their breaths visible in the autumn chill. Television crews set up their equipment with practiced efficiency, their cables snaking across worn granite. Inside courtroom 3, sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting prison bar shadows across the gallery's wooden benches. Margaret Hale sat in the front row, her hands folded around Ruthie's recovered choir pin. Thomas sat beside her, counting his heartbeats, a childhood habit that had shaped his career. Judge Harrison entered, his robes rustling in the silence. Bruckner shuffled to the podium in Orange County jumpsuit and chains, his shoulders hunched, yet something defiant lingered in his stance. The old authority remained, badly masked. 25 years, Harrison pronounced, his voice filling the hushed chamber. The number hung in the air, a quarter-century that seemed simultaneously excessive for a man Bruckner's age and insufficient for the weight of his crime. As the sentence landed, Bruckner's carefully maintained facade cracked. The Good Samaritan mask slipped away, revealing an old man's bitter scowl. His lips twisted, hands clenching the podium as deputies stepped forward to lead him out. Later that afternoon, a small group gathered at Hammond Bridge. The October sun hung low, painting the Gasconade River in amber light. Margaret held Ruthie's choir pin, its metal warm from her grip. Thomas stood close, steadying her as she reached out over the rail. "Come home, sweetheart," she whispered, releasing the pin. It caught the light as it fell, then disappeared beneath the calm surface with barely a ripple. Marlowe approached carefully, carrying the brass-collared lantern, released from evidence for this moment. Its familiar weight settled onto the concrete bridgehead where he'd placed it so many times in memory. With weathered hands, he turned the wick low, its gentle flame a reminder rather than a beacon. Across town at Ozark Regional Medical Center, Thomas worked his evening shift in the pediatric respiratory unit. A frightened 8-year-old boy struggled with his breathing, eyes wide, with panic. "Listen to my voice," Thomas said softly, taking the child's hand. "We'll count together. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. The ritual flowed naturally, born from nights of counting his own fears while waiting for a sister who never came home. In the sheriff's office, Detective Chen opened a fresh case file. 2 sets of initials carved beside RH in the cellar joist stared up from crime scene photos, MD and LK. Shallow cuts in old wood, each possibly marking another life interrupted. "We'll look," Chen promised her partner as she labeled the folder. "We owe them that much." Outside, sunset painted Ridge Hollow's streets in long shadows. The town's warning sirens began their monthly test. A system Bruckner had once coordinated, now transformed into something else. A reminder to look beneath helpful smiles and trusted faces, to question the stories they told themselves about good men and their convenient explanations. The sound echoed off the river bluffs, across the bridge where a lantern burned low, its flame steady in the gathering dark.